The prairie stretched wide and endless, its grasses bowed beneath the steady breath of evening wind. At the center of that vast stillness stood a lone Mustang, silver-gray with a mane darkened by storms and tangled by time. His body bore the lean lines of endurance, ribs faint beneath the coat, scars like faint etchings of battles weathered. For 5 years he had remained in that clearing, hooves pressed into earth that knew him as faithfully as any trail, waiting where once a wagon had halted, where once a family had promised to return. Seasons had turned over him like waves. Winters of snow biting into his hide, summers of fireflies swarming around his legs, rains that slicked his back with cold. Yet never did he move from the spot, eyes fixed on horizons that yielded no familiar shape. The people of the nearby town had long since given him a name whispered with equal parts awe and mockery: the ghost horse. Some said he was cursed, chained by memory. Others claimed he was a spirit walking the border between this world and the next. Boys dared one another to ride close, only to retreat when he tossed his head, nostrils flaring with disdain. Men spoke of capturing him, but ropes fell empty against his stubborn flight. In truth, he was no phantom, only flesh and breath, but his loyalty outlasted their understanding, and so he lingered, half legend, half living wound. Among those who knew of him was a young man named Elias. Broad of shoulder but hollow-eyed, Elias carried the burden of absence. His father had left on a cattle drive years ago and never returned, his fate swallowed by distance. Since then, Elias had walked with a bitterness that pressed into his every word. He had seen the Mustang first as a boy, standing beside his mother, who whispered that the horse's patience was a holy thing. But Elias, now grown, no longer believed in such softness. To him, the horse was a reminder of everything that never came home, everything that left and did not return. When others mocked the creature, he did not join, but neither did he defend. His silence was its own kind of wound. Yet the Mustang stirred something he could not wholly bury. Often, when dusk settled, Elias found himself wandering to the clearing, standing at a distance where the grass swallowed his boots, watching the animals still form against the horizon. There was a stubborn nobility in the way the horse refused to yield. Elias hated it, envied it, needed it. He told himself the horse was waiting for nothing, that no one would ever return. And yet he kept returning too, as if some part of him longed for the same miracle. On this evening, clouds gathered low, heavy with storm. Lightning flickered faintly along the rim of the sky, a pale warning. The Mustang lifted his head, ears twitching, as if he sensed something carried in the wind. His stance shifted, subtle but undeniable. A restless stamp of hooves, a ripple through the taut muscles of his neck. Elias, watching from the tree line, narrowed his eyes. For 5 years he had never seen the animal move with such alertness, as though the air itself whispered of change. The silence grew charged, filled with the weight of something approaching. Thunder rolled, a slow drumbeat across the plains. The Mustang's gaze fixed eastward, body tense as a drawn bow. Elias felt his own chest tighten in answer, a strange anticipation he could not name. It was as if time itself held its breath, and all the waiting of 5 long years pressed toward this moment. The clearing that had been only a monument to stillness now throbbed with possibility, and Elias could not turn away. 5 years earlier, the prairie had known a different sound. The creak of a wagon's wheels, the laughter of a child, the low murmur of parents speaking softly as they set camp beneath the stars. The Mustang had been part of that life then, tethered not by rope but by trust. He was young, spirited, and fierce, yet he allowed the girl to press her small hands against his neck, her voice carrying tunes that calmed storms within him. He remembered her scent, the warmth of her presence, the way she tied a scrap of red cloth in his mane, as if crowning him with belonging. But the night of the ambush tore that world apart. Strangers came with guns and greed, their shouts scattering the prairie's silence, their violence quick and merciless. The wagon burned, the parents fell, and only the child's cry remained before it too was swallowed by the chaos. The Mustang escaped, though not unscarred, and ever since he had returned to the same place where the wagon once stood, holding vigil for voices he could no longer hear. Elias had pieced together fragments of this story from his mother's whispers, from elders who shook their heads in pity. To them, the horse's faithfulness was a mark of grace. To Elias, it was a mockery. What good was waiting for those who could never return? His own father had disappeared just as suddenly, leaving behind a silence Elias could neither forgive nor forget. When he watched the Mustang, he saw not loyalty but futility, and it fanned the embers of resentment that already burned inside him. Yet despite this bitterness, he could not keep away. Some nights, he lingered so long that dew clung to his boots and dawn bled into the horizon, and still he stood watching, as if the horse's endurance called forth a longing he wished to deny. The townsfolk had their own views. To them, the animal was a curiosity, a tale to pass along in hushed tones at the saloon or the feed store. They warned newcomers about the ghost horse, the beast who had lost his mind and tethered himself to shadows. Children dared each other to touch the boundary of the clearing, laughing as they ran back, hearts pounding. But in private moments, even the scoffers lowered their voices when the horse was mentioned, uneasy with a devotion that seemed too human to dismiss entirely. No one could truly explain why he stayed. No one dared claim him. One late afternoon, word spread through the town of a stranger who had arrived quietly, carrying nothing but a weathered satchel and a shawl that had seen better years. She was not old, yet her face carried lines carved by hardship, her eyes holding a depth that unsettled those who met her gaze. She asked a single question in a voice both fragile and unwavering. Had anyone seen a horse that never left? At first, the townsfolk exchanged glances, suspicion edging their curiosity. Then someone mentioned the ghost horse, and a silence fell over the room. The woman's breath caught, though she tried to mask it, as if she had carried this inquiry for longer than anyone could imagine. Elias, overhearing, felt a flicker of disbelief. Could she truly be tied to the legend? He studied her from across the room, noting the way her hands trembled slightly when she touched the scarf at her neck. Something about her presence stirred memory, not his own, but the Mustang's. He knew it without knowing how. When she turned her face toward the prairie, determination in her gaze, Elias found himself following at a distance. He told himself it was curiosity, but in truth it was need, the same need that had always drawn him to the clearing. The Mustang stood in his place, head high against the bruised sky. As the woman approached, he lifted his ears, nostrils flaring. His muscles tensed, a ripple of recognition coursing through his frame. For the first time in 5 years, his body shifted, hooves pressing into the earth not in resistance but in response. Elias felt his pulse quicken, every doubt in him colliding with an unfamiliar hope. The air vibrated with anticipation, and as the first step carried the Mustang closer, Elias realized the story he thought finished was only just beginning. The prairie fell into hush as the woman drew near, her steps measured, her gaze never leaving the Mustang's form. She stopped a few paces from him, lowering her shawl to reveal the face of one who had endured more winters than her years should have allowed. Her eyes softened with recognition, and from her satchel she drew a length of faded cloth, crimson dulled by time. She laid it gently on the grass before her and sat cross-legged, not reaching, not demanding, only waiting. The horse quivered, ears pinned back, muscles taut with the memory of flight. Yet something in her stillness kept him rooted. Elias stood a little way off, his breath caught in his throat. He had come expecting disappointment, proof that the horse's vigil was nothing but a fool's tale. Instead, he felt his convictions faltering, watching the woman's patience mirror the horse's own. The scarf stirred faintly in the wind, its threadbare edges catching the last light of day, and the Mustang's nostrils flared as though scent could bridge the years between them. His hooves shifted, tentative, each inch forward heavy with meaning. The woman spoke then, her voice low, carrying fragments of a lullaby. The notes trembled but did not break, and with each one the distance between her and the Mustang narrowed. She told him of nights by firelight, of hands that once brushed his mane, of a little girl who had whispered secrets into his ear. Her words did not command, they remembered. The horse lowered his head slightly, the tension in his frame easing, though uncertainty still clung to him. Elias felt his chest tighten as he watched. He thought of his father's hat still hanging untouched on the wall, the way he had avoided it all these years for fear of the ache it carried. He realized unwillingly that he too had been waiting, his bitterness a tether no less binding than the horse's vigil. Yet where he had let anger corrode him, the Mustang had chosen fidelity. That recognition hollowed him out, leaving only a raw longing he could not name. The sun dipped, casting the clearing in bruised shadow. The Mustang took another step, and then another, until his breath mingled with the woman's, hot and trembling. She did not move her hands, only let her presence speak. The world seemed to still, as though 5 years of silence were about to break. Elias's pulse thundered in his ears, each moment stretched taut with expectation. And then the shot rang out. A sharp crack shattered the quiet, sending birds wheeling into the sky. The Mustang jerked, rearing back with a shrill cry that cut like glass. The woman flinched but did not scream, her body curved protectively over the scarf. Elias spun toward the sound, fury sparking in his veins. At the edge of the clearing stood 2 figures, rifles glinting faintly, eyes gleaming with greed. Poachers, drawn by whispers of the ghost horse, hungry for the profit his capture would bring. The Mustang stamped, his body coiled between flight and fight, but his gaze lingered on the woman as though torn. Elias stepped forward before he could think, placing himself between the intruders and the pair in the clearing. His voice came rough but unshaken. "Not tonight." The words carried farther than he expected, filling the charged air. The poachers exchanged a glance, lips curled in disdain, but Elias held his ground, fists clenched, heart hammering. Behind him, the Mustang's breathing came in ragged bursts, the sound of a creature standing at the edge of decision. The woman's eyes met Elias's briefly, gratitude flickering there like a spark in the dark. The night had shifted. What had begun as a vigil was now a battle for its survival. The next moment would decide whether waiting ended in loss or in miracle. The storm broke fully as the poachers stepped closer, their rifles raised with the cold certainty of men who saw only coin where others saw devotion. The prairie wind carried the smell of rain, the rumble of thunder pressing low against the earth. Elias planted his boots in the sodden grass, his voice rough but unwavering as he faced them. "You'll find nothing here worth taking." He had no weapon, no shield but his own body, yet something inside him refused to yield. For years he had carried the weight of abandonment. Tonight he stood against it, not for himself but for the horse and the woman who had brought light back into the clearing. The Mustang's cry split the night, a sound born of both rage and recognition. He pawed the ground, mud flying beneath his hooves, eyes fixed not on the intruders, but on the woman crouched with the crimson cloth. Her hand stretched slightly toward him, not commanding but steady, and the name she whispered, soft, trembling, seemed to travel further than the thunder. At that single word, the horse froze, ears pricked, as though memory itself had risen from the dark. The poachers sneered. One raised his rifle higher, sighting along the barrel at the Mustang's chest. Elias surged forward, slapping the weapon aside. The blow was clumsy but fueled by a force deeper than strength, and the man staggered. The other cursed, leveling his own gun, but the Mustang chose then. With a snort like rolling fire, he charged. His body thundered across the clearing, not away but straight into the path of danger, scattering both men before they could recover. One stumbled into the mud, weapon clattering, the other leaping back in shock as hooves cut the earth inches from his side. Elias darted to the woman, pulling her up from the ground. Their eyes met for the briefest instant, and in that moment they understood each other's place in this fight. She the heart, he the shield. The Mustang circled back, mane wild in the storm, every line of his body alight with defiance. The poachers, shaken, scrambled toward the tree line, their courage thinning against the combined will of man, woman, and beast. In the end, greed faltered before faith. When silence returned, broken only by the patter of rain, the Mustang came to a halt before the woman. His head lowered slowly, trembling, until his muzzle brushed the edge of the crimson cloth. She lifted her hand at last, fingers grazing the scar along his neck, and he did not pull away. Instead, a sound rose from him, deep, mournful, resonant, a voice held in silence for 5 long years. She pressed her forehead against his, whispering, "I'm home." The words were both confession and promise, binding the years of waiting into something whole again. Elias stood apart, drenched and breathless, yet he felt something shift within him. For so long he had let absence shape him, bitterness filling the space where hope should have lived. Now he saw the truth in the horse's vigil. Waiting was not weakness. It was love enduring against all odds. He thought of his father's hat, untouched on the wall, and knew he could face it at last, not as a relic of loss, but as proof that memory could be carried without breaking. Dawn crept over the horizon, pale light spilling across the prairie. The storm eased, leaving the clearing washed and new. The Mustang stood beside the woman, no longer a ghost but flesh and spirit reunited. His loyalty proven not in endless waiting, but in the miracle of recognition. Elias turned his face toward the rising sun, the weight on his shoulders lighter than it had ever been. The clearing, once a monument to grief, now breathed with life, and in its silence lay a promise that faith, no matter how long it endured, could be answered at last.